Martin Howe picked up the laminated VIP attendance list for the National Design Summit and used his pen the way he used everything, with the brisk confidence of a man who had never been told no often enough to learn caution. His assistant, Cassidy, 29, sharp, recently promoted from junior coordinator to whatever title Martin invented for people he found useful, was sitting across the breakfast table in the hotel suite watching him work through the names. Spouses, Martin said. It wasn't really a question. Most of the senior partners are bringing theirs, yes. He reached the line that read Howe, Viveca, spouse of M. Howe, and paused for exactly 2 seconds. Not with love, not with warmth, with the particular calculation of a man deciding whether a detail serves the evening or complicates it. Remove my wife, he said. Cassidy looked up from her tablet. She's not coming, Martin added, capping the pen. This isn't her kind of night. She'd be uncomfortable. And frankly, she'd distract from the work we're trying to do here. He straightened his coffee cup on its saucer. Put my name down for a solo seat at the Aldridge table. That's where I need to be positioned. Cassidy wrote it down. She had learned in 8 months of working for Martin Howe that the fastest way to keep her job was to write things down before she had time to feel anything about them. What Martin did not know, what he had never once thought to ask, was that his wife was the keynote speaker at the same summit he had just excluded her from attending. He had no idea, because in 14 years of marriage, he had never asked Viveca Strand Howe what she did when he wasn't looking. Drop your city in the comments right now, and don't you dare close this video before this story is finished. Welcome to Crimson Secrets. Viveca Strand was 47 years old, and she had spent the better part of 2 decades being underestimated by people who should have known better. Her husband was simply the most recent in a long and distinguished line. She had grown up in Cincinnati, the daughter of an architect named Harold Strand, who designed public libraries and community centers, and took his daughter to every job site from the time she could walk. Look at the bones, he used to tell her, crouching beside her and pointing up at the steel frame rising against the sky. Before it has a face, before it has windows or walls or any of the things people think of when they think of a building, it has bones. And if the bones are wrong, nothing you put on top of it will ever be right. Viveca had never forgotten that. She had studied architecture at Georgia Tech, gotten her graduate degree at Harvard's GSD, and gone to work for a firm in Atlanta at 26 with the specific intention of learning exactly how wrong bones failed and how right bones endured. At 33, she had founded Strand & Associates. She had not announced it. She had not sent out press releases or hosted a launch party or applied for recognition in any of the industry publications that covered new firms with the breathless enthusiasm of people who mistake activity for significance. She had simply incorporated the company, structured it carefully to operate under her professional name, V. Strand, and begun the quiet, patient, deeply unglamorous work of building something real. Within 3 years, Strand & Associates had designed 2 mixed-use towers in Atlanta and a civic arts complex in Nashville that earned a regional honor from the American Institute of Architects. Within 7 years, the firm had been quietly shortlisted for major work in Chicago, Denver, and Seattle. Within 12, V. Strand was a name that serious people in serious rooms said with a specific tone of voice. The tone reserved for entities that had earned their reputation without ever making noise about it. By the time Viveca was 45, Strand & Associates had a portfolio of 28 major projects across 14 states, a staff of 81, and a waiting list for new commissions that ran 18 months long. The firm had never given a press interview. V. Strand had never been photographed at an industry event. The founder had operated with such deliberate discretion that even people who had worked adjacent to Strand & Associates for years did not know that the V stood for a woman, or that the woman was sitting in a renovated farmhouse in Lake Forest, Illinois, running the whole thing from a home studio, while her husband told dinner guests she had a little design hobby she keeps herself busy with. She had allowed that story to stand. That was the part she would have to sit with later. The first serious crack appeared in the 4th year of their marriage, At a client dinner Martin hosted for the partners of a development group he was courting. The architect of record on the group's flagship project, a man named Baxter, was at the table, talking about the building's curtain wall system in a way that made it clear he had not fully understood the moisture infiltration problem that Viveca had identified in the published renderings 6 months earlier. She said so, politely, precisely, with the specific technical vocabulary of someone who had spent 17 years thinking about exactly this kind of problem. The table went quiet. Baxter looked at her. He looked at Martin. He looked back at her. That's an interesting read, he said carefully, with the particular smile men produce when they are deciding how seriously to take a source they did not expect. Martin's hand came to rest on Viveca's arm under the table, not a squeeze, a weight, steady, and communicating, in the way that certain gestures communicate without words. Not now. Afterward, in the car, he said, "You know Baxter's been practicing for 20 years. I know, Viveca said. He's still wrong about the curtain wall. Maybe, but you made him look incompetent in front of his clients. He made himself look incompetent. I just named the reason." Martin was quiet for a long moment. "I just need you to let me handle the technical conversations at these things. It goes better for everyone." Viveca looked out the window at the Chicago street moving past and said nothing. She filed it. She watched. Over the next several years, she watched Martin build a version of their marriage, in which she was warm, supportive, well-dressed, and architecturally decorative, present in the rooms where her presence reflected well on him, absent from the conversations where her competence might complicate his authority. She watched him take the instincts she shared over dinner and deploy them in boardrooms the following week as his own sharp thinking. She watched him learn the language of her profession just well enough to sound credible to people who knew less than she did. And she watched herself let him, not out of weakness, out of something more complicated. The patience of a woman who had decided she was not ready yet to spend her full weight on a man who had not yet proven he deserved it. She had been waiting for the right moment. She was still waiting when the notification came through. It was 11:14 on a Wednesday night, 3 days before the National Design Summit in Chicago. She was in her home studio, reviewing calculations for a mixed-income housing project in Memphis when her phone buzzed with an automated alert. Access revoked. Howe Viveca spouse credential. She read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on her drafting table and sat for a moment in the specific kind of quiet that belongs to people who have been waiting for something without knowing. They were waiting, and have just received it. She thought about the curtain wall dinner. She thought about the afternoon in Denver when a developer recognized her by her work and Martin had smoothly redirected the conversation before the man could establish exactly what or whom he recognized. She thought about the 46 professional events, the introductions that lasted 90 seconds before Martin returned the room to himself. The precise and recurring sensation of standing in a room she understood more deeply than anyone present, and choosing again to be quiet. She thought about her father at a construction site in Cincinnati, crouching beside a small girl and pointing at steel bones against the sky. "Build quietly," Harold had told her. "The building speaks when it's finished." Viveca picked up her phone and called Joelle Pratt. Joelle was 44, VP of Operations at Strand & Associates, and one of the most composed human beings Viveca had ever worked beside. She answered on the second ring. "I need something from you," Viveca said. "Name it." "I'm going to the summit, not as Martin's wife, as V. Strand." A brief pause, not surprise, but the specific recalibration that happens when a decision that has been building for years finally arrives as a sentence. "You're already the keynote speaker," Joelle said carefully. "You were always going." "I know, but I want it announced correctly. Full name, full title, the firm, my role, all of it. No mention of anything else." "Done," Joelle said. "I'll call the summit director tonight." "Thank you." "Viveca." A pause. The professional voice shifted, just slightly. Are you all right? Viveca looked at the Memphis housing plans spread across her drafting table, at the framed photograph her father had given her. The first building she had ever designed, a small community clinic in Decatur, Georgia, still standing after 20 years. I've been waiting a long time to stop being quiet, she said. I think tonight I'm ready. The National Design Summit opened on Thursday evening at the Grand Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago. With the electricity that gathers when you place 500 people in a room and every single one of them believes, with complete sincerity, that they are among the most important people there. Martin worked it well. He always did. He had the gift of men who have spent decades in high-stakes rooms. The ability to make eye contact that communicated you, specifically, are the person I most want to speak with tonight, and to deliver it with enough warmth that the performance disappeared into the feeling it produced. Cassidy moved beside him with practiced efficiency. By 8:15 p.m., Martin had positioned himself near the table, where Everard Knox and Niles Parrish were seated. Everard Knox was 63, managing principal of Knox Meridian Ventures, and one of the institutional investors could risk presence on a development project. Its entire trajectory. He had silver hair, a handshake that communicated decades of having nothing left to prove, and the kind of stillness that belongs to men who have stopped performing for rooms and started simply occupying them. Niles Parrish was 51, compact and precise, principal of Parrish Group, which controlled development financing across the Midwest with a selectivity that had made their signature one of the most coveted in the business. Martin needed both of them for the Aldridge Tower project. He had been working toward this conversation for 11 months. Everard, Martin said, extending a hand. Niles, I've been looking forward to this evening. Good summit so far, Everard said. His eyes were doing something Martin failed to notice, scanning the room, looking for someone. I want to make sure we have time tonight to walk through the Aldridge proposal, Martin said. Once you see the full integration plan, the financing structure becomes very clear. Of course. Niles's tone was measured. We have some questions about the design execution specifically. There's actually someone we were hoping to connect with tonight. Oh, Martin kept his expression open. V. Strand, Everard said. We've been trying to get a conversation with Strand and Associates for 2 years. Someone mentioned they might be represented here tonight. Martin kept his smile exactly where he needed it to be. I've heard of the firm, he said. Solid reputation. Solid is an understatement, Niles said. If we're committing to something at the Aldridge scale, we want the design bones right from the beginning. He glanced toward the stage at the far end of the room. I understand Vita's the keynote tonight, actually. Martin laughed, the easy laugh of a man confident in his misunderstanding. I don't know that I'd put too much stock in a keynote. Ladies and gentlemen, the summit director's voice carried across the ballroom. If I could have your attention. We're honored tonight to have as our keynote someone whose work has quietly shaped the built environment of this country. For over a decade, please welcome the founder and principal of Strand and Associates, V. Strand. The lights shifted toward the stage entrance, and Viveca walked in. She wore a charcoal blazer over a deep burgundy dress, her dark hair pulled back with the kind of simplicity that requires a great deal of confidence to carry correctly. She moved to the podium with a composure that Martin would not have called remarkable, because he had seen that composure across 14 years of breakfast tables and dinner parties and had never once thought to ask what it was built on. The room gave her a different applause than it gave most people. Not polite, not performative, the particular, slightly relieved applause of a community of professionals who have been working adjacent to someone's reputation for years, and are finally, in this moment, placing the name and the person together. Everard Knox stood up. He was across the room, but he stood and started to clap, and the people around him looked at him. And then they stood too, and within 15 seconds the stage had moved through the ballroom like weather. Martin Howe's champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. He was looking at his wife. His wife, who was standing at the podium of the National Design Summit, adjusting the microphone with the ease of someone who had done this before, not because she was performing ease, but because she simply had it and beginning to speak. About the architecture of trust, about the bones that hold a structure through decades of weather and use, and the slow pressure of time, about the difference between buildings designed to impress and buildings designed to endure. Martin did not hear a word of it. He was running in the 45 seconds before he recovered his face and made it do something normal again. A rapid private inventory of 14 years that was reorganizing itself around information he had not known was missing. Across the room, Everard Knox was listening to Viveca with the specific, focused attention of a man receiving something he had been waiting for. The keynote lasted 22 minutes. At the end of it, the room gave Viveca a second round of applause, louder than the first, and Everard was already moving toward the stage before the sound had fully faded. Niles one step behind him, both wearing the expressions of men who have spent a great deal of professional effort trying to find a person and have just discovered that person was closer than they ever thought. Martin watched Everard embrace Viveca with the warmth of someone greeting a colleague he genuinely respected. He watched Niles lean in, the two of them, in the immediate back-and-forth rhythm of a conversation that did not need warming up because it had already been building in correspondence and reputation and years of near misses. He watched for 11 minutes. Then he crossed the room. Viveca saw him coming. She had always been good at reading a room. She said something brief to Everard, who stepped back with the discreet understanding of someone who recognizes a private moment beginning to form. Then she turned. They stood 2 feet apart in the middle of the most important professional event of Martin Howe's career, and for the first time in 14 years, he had no idea what to say. "Hello, Martin," she said. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Strand," he said, "the firm V. Strand. How long?" Viveca looked at him steadily. 14 years, she said. "I founded the firm the year before we met." The words arrived like cold water on a surface that had not been expecting it. Before they were married, before the dinner parties where he had explained her to rooms full of people who had never thought to ask her anything directly before, she had already been this. "Can we find somewhere to talk?" he said. Viveca considered him for a moment. Then she nodded once. Not in agreement, exactly, more in the manner of someone for whom a long postponed conversation has just become unavoidable. And she walked. They found a corridor off the main ballroom, carpeted and quiet, lit soft enough for privacy, but not so dim that Martin could pretend the expression on his wife's face was different from what it actually was. He turned to face her. He wanted to begin from control. He had built his entire career on the ability to enter difficult conversations already holding the frame. What came out instead was raw. "Why didn't you tell me?" Viveca's expression did not change. "I told you things every night for 14 years. You chose what to hear." "I didn't know you were running that you had." "You didn't ask." Her voice was quiet, not angry, precise, the way a level is precise when it names the exact degree of something being off. "Martin, you have introduced me at 46 separate professional events. I counted in 43 of those introductions. You described me as your wife and moved the conversation back to yourself within 90 seconds. 3 times you mentioned I had an interest in design. Not a career. An interest." He pressed his fingers against his mouth briefly. "You should have corrected me." "I corrected you at the curtain wall dinner. You put your hand on my arm under the table." She paused. "I tried to correct you in Denver, and you changed the subject before the man who recognized my work could establish how he knew me." Another pause. "I stopped trying to correct you, Martin, because every time I did, you made it very clear which version of me you preferred in the room." The silence held its shape. "Everard Knox knows you," Martin said quietly. The words arrived not as an accusation, but as the sound of a man beginning piece by piece to understand the actual size of something he had believed he had fully mapped. "We've collaborated twice. He's been trying to bring Strand and Associates onto a major co-development for 18 months. Niles has had 3 of my firm's projects in his evaluation portfolio for 2 years. The Aldridge Tower. Yes. Martin looked at her. You could have been in that conversation from the beginning. Yes. Instead he stopped, a long exhale. I removed you from the attendee list this morning. I crossed out your name and told Cassidy to move on. I know, I received the automated notification. The information settled over him the way that very cold air settles, not as a single shock, but as a spreading, deepening chill that takes time to reach the bone. He had removed his wife from a summit where she was the keynote speaker. He had crossed her name off a list as an afterthought, a logistical decision made in 30 seconds over a hotel breakfast, and she had been the most important person in the building. Why are you here? He said finally. After this morning, why did you come? Viveca tilted her head the way she did when she was about to say something exact. Because if I let you cross my name out without consequence, I would be confirming a story you've been telling about me for 14 years, and I am done letting that story go unanswered. She met his eyes without flinching. I didn't come to destroy your deal, Martin. The Aldridge is a sound project. I told Everard and Niles what I honestly believe about it. If that helps you, it helps you. But I came here as myself, as V. Strand. As the person I have always been, whether or not you looked. Martin stood very still. I thought I was protecting the evening, he said. My position, the presentation. I know you did. I didn't know what I was doing, he exhaled slowly. That's the honest answer. I didn't know enough about you to understand what I was doing. Viveca looked at him for a long time. Not with anger, not with triumph, but with something more difficult than either, the clear measuring regard of a woman deciding in real time what the truth in front of her is actually worth. That's the part that matters most, she said. Not that you removed my name, that it never occurred to you to wonder who I was before you did. The sentence landed on him like something structural failing. He had spent his professional life believing he understood the rooms he walked into and the people in them. He had spent 14 years believing he understood his wife. He had constructed an entire interior architecture of their marriage, who she was, what she wanted, what she was capable of, without ever once stopping to test whether any of it was accurate, without ever asking the question that would have made the answer possible. Everard and Niles are waiting, Viveca said. It was not a dismissal. It was the observation of a woman who understood that Martin had obligations in that room and that a corridor at midnight was not the place to resolve 14 years. We're not done, he said. No, she agreed, we're not. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he straightened his jacket, the automatic gesture of a man putting himself back together, and he walked back through the door. Viveca stayed in the corridor alone. She breathed in, she breathed out. She thought about her father at a job site in Cincinnati, the steel bones of a library rising above them, his voice telling her that the building would eventually speak for itself, that all she had to do was make the bones right, and wait for the moment when the walls went up and the world could finally see what had always been there. She had made the bones right. She had done it quietly, patiently, over 14 years, in a home studio in Lake Forest, while her husband told people she had a hobby. The building had spoken tonight. She went back in. 3 weeks later, Viveca gave her first public interview to a journalist named Paul Gentry, who wrote for Architectural Record, and who had been trying for 4 years to identify the person behind the firm's initials. At the end of the interview, he asked one last question. V. Strand has operated almost entirely without a public profile for 14 years. Is that going to change? Viveca looked at him for a moment. It already has, she said. Then she looked at the window, at the Chicago skyline, at the bones of buildings she could read at a glance. The V stands for Viveca. It always did. I just decided it was time the whole name was in the room. He wrote it down. And somewhere across the city, Martin Howe read it 3 days later. Sitting alone at a breakfast table, in a house that had always been larger than he understood. And he set the magazine down very carefully, and he sat for a long time in the particulars silence of a man who is beginning, for the first time, to hear everything he has not been listening to. The building, as her father had promised, had spoken. It always does, when the bones are right.